at darlene@generationshealth.com. We are recording this webinar, which means that after the webinar, you will also receive a copy. This will be emailed to you. Those are the basics for the housekeeping. And I'd like to go ahead and get this book club started by giving you a little bit of information about our facilitator. Our facilitator for this 15-week virtual book club for dementia caregivers is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, and a gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. She has been featured in national media, including the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, and the Chicago Tribune. When she's not speaking and writing about caregiving and healthcare, she can be found watching reruns of The Office. Today, she's joining us from Louisville, where she just keynoted for the Kentucky Senior Living Association's conference. Let's welcome Jennifer L. FitzPatrick, MSW, CSP.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're so happy to have you here. This has been in the works for a while, and we're so delighted that you're here to join us for the virtual book club for dementia caregivers based on the book Cruising Through Caregiving. So as Darlene said, we really encourage participation in the chat box. Please feel free to write in any questions at any point, and Darlene will field them. And periodically, if Darlene sees that people are raising their hands in the chat box section, she's going to go ahead and unmute. But because of background noise, we are going to keep it muted for most of the time. And again, in the future, if you want to ask questions or if there's topics you'd like to bring up based on the chapter that we're covering, please feel free to go ahead and do that ahead of time, jen@generationshealth.com. So welcome, everybody. So these book club sessions are all about you. And so we're going to be having special guests, we're going to be having conversation, but the goal of these virtual book club sessions are, one, to help you reduce stress. So the reason that I wrote Cruising Through Caregiving is because I spent a whole career watching caregivers be so stressed out and knowing that there were some things that they could do to reduce their stress. Dementia caregiving is some of the most stressful caregiving out there. And so our goal is really to help you reduce stress as much as possible. Second is to reduce your burnout, because if you're burnout, your loved one who you're taking care of is not going to get the best care possible. So we want to do everything that we possibly can to reduce your burnout. And then what do we want to increase? We want to increase your access to resources. So for whatever you've got going on right now with your caregiving situation and your loved one, it's likely that there's resources that you might not know about yet. So we're going to introduce you to new resources. And then finally, we want to increase your awareness and your ideas of what it means to be a good caregiver. Now, in Cruising Through Caregiving, if you've read the book, you probably already know that I believe very strongly that there's not just one way to be a good caregiver. There are many, many ways to be a good caregiver. And I think a lot of people go into caregiving assuming that if I'm going to be a good caregiver, I have to do everything. Or if I'm going to be a good caregiver, mom has to move in with me. And that's simply not true. There are many, many ways to be a good caregiver. So I keep getting the question, do I need to read Cruising Through Caregiving? To get benefit from this book club, absolutely not. We're calling it a virtual book club because it's based on the 15 chapters of Cruising Through Caregiving. But to get benefit, you absolutely do not need to read the book. Although, if you do read the chapter ahead of time, it will help you to engage and maybe ask questions and give you some food for thought before we all join together. But if you'd like to read the book, and again, it's not mandatory, you can certainly get benefit even if you haven't read the book, you can get a copy at most local libraries. So if you're on a budget, you don't necessarily have to buy the book. But that said, if you would like to purchase your local bookstore or Barnes & Noble, or if you want to go online, if you go to Amazon.com, if you go to smile.amazon.com, and you put in Cruising Through Caregiving, and you also put in Hilarity for Charity, one of our co-sponsors, you're going to be able to have some of the proceeds of the book go directly to Hilarity for Charity. So that's another option. But again, you can just enjoy the virtual book club, and you don't necessarily have to buy the book or even read the book if you're not a reader. So don't worry about that. And again, as we go, feel free at any point to write in comments, questions at any point. We're really glad to hear it from anything that you would like to join in at any point. So first thing, before we jump into the content of today's book club, I would like to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors. And of course, they are Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors. And their websites are here, hilarityforcharity.org and oasissenior-advisors.org. And in a little while, we are going to be able to introduce them a little bit more and give you a little bit more information about what these two wonderful organizations do that are here for you, that provide wonderful services for caregivers, in particular dementia caregivers. So we're going to get a little bit more into detail and introduce you to some of the team from those organizations shortly. But thank you so much to Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors. So we're going to talk now about what is caregiving. Caregiving is a complicated term. A lot of times people, like I said a few moments ago, people make the assumption that if you're a caregiver, that mom moves in with you. Or if you're a caregiver, if it's your husband or if it's your wife, that you're doing everything for them. There's actually a lot of different types of caregiving. And in the first chapter of Cruising Through Caregiving, which is Caregiving 101, we talk about what exactly does caregiving mean. It's interesting to me with all my years of experience, and I'm sure that there are many professionals that may be on this program today with their years of experience, that people sometimes are actually caregivers and they never realized that they were a caregiver. So what is a caregiver exactly? So in Cruising Through Caregiving, if you have read the book, you may have noticed that I have categorized caregivers into three parts: primary caregivers, secondary caregivers, and tertiary caregivers. Primary caregivers, so I use nautical analogies throughout Cruising Through Caregiving. Primary caregivers I liken to a captain of the ship. So if you're out on a ship, a small ship, a large ship, any kind of ship, I think we all know that you probably only want to have one captain. You want to have one person in charge of that vessel. So one captain for a caregiving crew. What should that captain do? The captain, the primary caregiver, is in charge. They're supposed to be overseeing. Perhaps you might also look at it as the CEO. You might be a CEO. So if you've ever been a manager at a job, you might be familiar with this concept of being that captain, being in charge. If you have a staff that reports into you, you certainly don't want to do everything. You want to have other people sharing in the workload. And that's what we really want every caregiving scenario to have. We want to have a captain of the caregiving ship. We want that one person that's in charge. But here's the catch. We don't want that person to do everything. We are here today to give you permission and say, if you are doing everything, please stop. We don't want you to do everything. So you don't want to do everything. Think about if you are even on a small boat like we just looked at, we have a captain. If that captain is the only person doing everything, trying to dock the boat, trying to look at the navigation, trying to see if there's other boats or if there's people out on jet skis out on the water, that would be challenging. Now, a lot of captains are very good and they're very qualified, but it's a lot easier for any captain. Any captain will tell you it's easier if he or she has a crew. So we don't want you as the captain. And so often, who ends up being the captain? I'm going to take a moment to ask if anyone would like to join in and write into Darlene, who is usually the captain? Is it usually a man or a woman? Is it usually a husband or wife? Is it usually a daughter, a son? Who is usually the captain in a caregiving scenario? And also feel free to write in if you feel that you are the captain or the primary caregiver in your caregiving situation. Give you a moment to write in. So I got a couple people writing in the daughter. And yes, interestingly, more often than not, there is a female who is the captain of the caregiving ship. Not always, but often a female is the captain. And more often than not, it is a daughter-in-law, but very often it's a wife. also a granddaughter. But actually, it's interesting. There are many men who participate in caregiving, many devoted husbands, devoted kids, devoted sons, devoted grandsons. Yeah, so a couple of other people are writing in wife being the captain. So in many situations, we do find that it is, somebody really close. And most of the time it's somebody geographically close. So, but really most of the time in almost every scenario, we really only want one captain. And if any of you out there are boaters, you know that captains want to be the solo captain. They don't want someone sharing that big responsibility with. So primary caregiver is our captain. So a first mate is really our secondary caregiver. And as far as a first mate with being a secondary caregiver, I have an example here. This is actually me on my boat. That other picture you saw was my husband captaining the ship, and I am getting ready to help him dock the boat. And I got to tell you, my husband is a pretty good captain. He could dock the boat without my help if he needed to, but he really appreciates when someone is there like me to help him dock the boat, to help him look out and see, are there other vessels coming? Are there anybody out there on the water? And this is really important, especially if the seas are rough, if the water is rough. And I think that a lot of times, for a caregiver, the analogy that I like to share with a caregiver is maybe in the beginning, like maybe if your loved one is in the early stages of Alzheimer's or the early stages of Lewy body dementia or another type of dementia, you feel like you've got it. You're the captain, but maybe you don't have a secondary caregiver yet. Well, we want to get you one, or we want to get you two secondary caregivers, because eventually you're going to hit rougher waters and you're going to need additional help. So somebody just wrote in a comment or a question. I'm going to take a quick look at that. It's like we said, we want that to be as interactive as possible here. Okay, great. We got a comment. Okay. We have somebody wrote in that their mom is supposed to be the caretaker for a 94-year-old grandmom, but as the granddaughter, you seem to be taking over for a lot because your mom's having some trouble. Yeah, there's a lack of role clarity. And what I would say to you is, wow, that's a really tough one, because if your mom still wants to be that captain, that can be really tricky. I'd recommend trying to have a conversation about that, because, or maybe, and again, in some families, this does work out where you split the duties. Or maybe you're a very close secondary caregiver or first mate. But definitely that happens sometimes. And also sometimes what happens is people change roles. If that primary caregiver or that captain starts to have some health challenges of her own or his own. So thank you for that comment. But yeah, there often are role issues there. So what can a first mate do? So I'm guessing that there's probably some folks on the program today that are saying, I'm the captain. I don't really want anybody else to do anything. Or what else could people possibly do? Why would I need a first mate? Or, you know what, I could see why a first mate would be helpful, but I really don't want to have a first mate, because what if they do it wrong? Well, of all my experience in working with family caregivers, when people do accept a first mate or a secondary caregiver or two, they typically find that their life gets a lot more manageable, because we don't want being the captain of the caregiving ship to be your only role. What does a secondary caregiver or first mate do? So first thing is, this is somebody that can directly help you, or they can directly help your loved one. So maybe think of some examples. So if you're a captain today and you're thinking, I'm the captain and I do have a first mate that I rely on, or I have a couple first mates, maybe write in and share with us, what do you have that person do? So remember, this is somebody that they can actually do directly help out with your loved one, do some hands-on direct stuff with your loved one, or they can maybe do some nice things for you. So maybe before I move on to the next slide, if you would like to take a couple of moments, we would really appreciate to hear what your ideas are. What kinds of things do you have a secondary caregiver or a first mate do? I'm going to give it another moment or two, see if anybody writes in. Okay, so we've got somebody that wrote in that Marty wrote in, my sister and I share caregiving roles. She sets up appointments and meetings. That's a great job for a secondary caregiver, setting up appointments and meetings. So I'm going to give it another moment to see if anybody else writes in. If nobody writes in, then I'm going to be very suspicious that we've got a lot of captains that haven't assembled a crew yet. All right, I'm suspicious that we have a lot of captains out there that haven't assembled a crew yet. So let's talk a little bit more about ideas on what the secondary caregiver / first mate can do for you. And again, this is just some ideas. There's lots of ways to do this. Oh, got somebody else writing in that the crew and their family is very chaotic. Oh, that happens. And we are going to cover that over this 15-week period. We're going to cover how to make it less chaotic, because I know it can seem impossible, but we can do that. We can make it less chaotic. So what can a secondary caregiver or first mate do to help? These are just a few suggestions. Pick up groceries or prescriptions. So that would be something that not only helps the person who has dementia, your loved one, but also can be helpful to you. It's something you don't have to do. How about visit with your loved one to give you a break? Now, I know a lot of people, a lot of captains are really reluctant to leave the loved one who has dementia. But can you leave for 5 minutes to take a walk or have a cup of coffee, or maybe just go into another room? Maybe if you're not comfortable leaving the house while you have a friend or a neighbor or your sister stop by, maybe just go into another room and read for 15 minutes. Is that something that you'd be comfortable with? It's something to think about. Take your loved one to the doctor. I know a lot of captains are really, they have a lot of sense of need to be the one to take their loved one to the doctor. But in some cases, it might be necessary. So if you're a working caregiver, and again, in many weeks, we're going to do actually a terrific program with Amy Goyer, who is the working caregiver expert at AARP. She's going to be our special guest. Some weeks we're going to have special guests. But maybe you have a really important business trip. You still have a job, you work, you have to go on this business trip. There's an important appointment that your loved one really needs to go to. Maybe this is somebody in your family or friend network that you trust to take your loved one to the doctor. Again, I know that that's one that a lot of captains struggle letting go of. They really don't want to let go of that. What about pick up your kids from softball practice? One of the things that a first mate or secondary caregiver can really do is to take something off of your plate. So picking up groceries, picking up prescriptions, picking up your kids. So maybe it's not that they just visit with your loved one or maybe fill in as a backup for taking your loved one to the doctor, but maybe picking up your kids. And I think we have a couple of people writing in, so I'm going to just take a quick look at that. Okay. We do have quite a few comments. Okay. So Marty's, okay, we got somebody. Jan says, I'm a daughter living away with father who has dementia. His wife is the captain and we're just now seeing and visiting, but not really caregiving. Okay, so Jan, that is a great comment and that's fine. But I would say that in some ways, I bet you're still doing some caregiving. Let's see if even just visiting, I would put you in the category of possibly secondary or tertiary. If you're spending any time with him, even visiting, I would say that you're potentially in the role of a secondary caregiver, because you are spending some time with him. If you're ever by yourself with him, even, or even giving his wife, maybe your stepmother or his wife, a break, I would consider you to be a caregiver. So Nicole says some other things that a secondary caregiver or a first mate could do is manage medications, go grocery shopping, mow the lawn. Yeah, mow the lawn this time of year. Yep. Manage bills, make the doctor's appointments. As I believe earlier, Marty said that she has a sister that, or he or she, I'm sorry, Marty, I'm not sure if you're what you identify as, but the sibling does make those appointments. Karen says, the captain has no sense of urgency, not always attentive to needs and willing to accept the dementia changes. Treats mom like she can handle so much more. And Karen, that is a situation where sometimes bringing the doctor in, bringing a care manager in, that can sometimes be really helpful to see, should there be a role shift? Is it time to look at more help in the home, maybe home care, maybe senior living? But it very well may be that we might need to look at some role changes. So yeah, that's tough. This stuff is not easy. Caregiving is, I believe, some of the toughest activities that toughest role that someone can take on. And in particular, dementia caregiving is especially tough. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I really keep sharing and keep asking questions, making comments. I want this to be all about what you need. We really want it to be about what you need. So these are some of the things that a secondary caregiver can do. So a first mate or secondary caregiver, but now we move on to the idea of a tertiary caregiver. And of course, using that boating analogy, I like to call the tertiary caregiver your dockhand. So when Sean and I'm going to just use Sean and I as an example, my husband Sean and I, who captain, I'm the first mate. And when we're out on the water, I'll be looking out any other vessels out there. Is there, a piece of driftwood in the water? Is there anything to look out for? And I'll be certainly helping with docking when it's time to dock. But especially when it's rough weather, maybe you get caught in a rainstorm, and when you go to dock, when you pull up to that marina or you pull up to wherever you're trying to dock, if there's a dockhand there that helps pull you in from the other side, it can be invaluable. And so again, a lot of times just the captain can do it. But if the weather is a little bit rougher, they really, really appreciate that first mate. But then even more so when that dockhand's on the other side pulling you in. And my philosophy is that we all need many dockhands, that most of us are not allowing as many dockhands as possible to be part of the caregiving process. So let's talk about some things that a dockhand can do. So my belief is that a dockhand is just about helping the captain, or maybe even supporting the secondary caregiver. They're not going to do anything direct. So I know sometimes, especially captains will say to me, well, I have a neighbor that maybe could help, but I'm not going to ask her to stay with my mother while I go grocery shopping, or I'm not going to ask her to, take my mom to the doctor. That's fine. This person's not appropriate to ask to be in that secondary role, but they might be very appropriate to be a dockhand. So what sorts of things might a dockhand do? Maybe take a few moments if anybody wants to write in a little bit about what kinds of things a dockhand, somebody that maybe has a little bit less intimacy with the person who has dementia, understands them a little bit less. Feel free to write in and chat. And Darlene, if anyone's raising their hands, please feel free to unmute as we go. If you would like to raise your hand, feel free to unmute or ask to be unmuted. We can, if you'd like to verbally make your, we might try to unmute. Know that, because I know that there may be some people on the telephone that aren't at a computer where they can write in the chat section. I am going to see if Darlene could please do that at least once. But if the background noise is too heavy, we're going to shut it off. So just again, if you're going to be on these programs where you're going to be calling in rather than being on a computer or a tablet, please send in your questions and comments, but we will try. So maybe, Darlene, if you want to try to unmute for a moment and see if anyone would like to make a comment or ask a verbal question. And if it's too much background noise, we'll just shut it down. Okay, we have somebody write in. Darlene is going to unmute for a moment, but I did want to share, we did have someone write in. Oh, I love this. A tertiary person can be a friend who listens while the caregiver vents about the situation. Yes, that's what I mean by a tertiary person. Some people, they might be your friend that lives cross country, or they might be a friend that lives overseas, but that person might be able to just let you vent. We also have Tim from Oasis Senior Advisors. He's got a lot of experience with this. They might just be someone that gives the captain an hour a break just to chat and talk about something else. So Cheryl says they don't deal directly with the patient. They offer help to the primary caregiver by giving them support, chatting, venting, or take them out, maybe coffee, maybe lunch, help them get away from the caregiving role for a bit. Actually, we are unmuted, it sounds like, so if anyone would like to verbally ask a question, make a comment, feel free. If it's too much background noise, we're going to shut it down, though. Okay, I'm not hearing anybody speak, and I'm hearing a lot of background noise, so I think we're going to go ahead and shut that down. But if you raise your hand, or if you in the future, if you want to send comments and questions ahead of time, if you're going to be joining us by telephone, feel free to do that, and we'll try to address your comment question as much as we possibly can. But it didn't sound like anybody. Okay, so. Yeah, great. This is, okay, so Marty asks, would a therapist be a tertiary caregiver? So I don't see a tertiary caregiver as a professional, as a therapist. I think a therapist can sort of be part of your crew, but not necessarily a tertiary caregiver. They might be somebody that you, like a support group, a therapist, a care manager, an elder law attorney. I see them sort of as part of your crew, but not really as a tertiary caregiver necessarily. Your primary, your secondary, your tertiary, at least in my opinion, I see them more as friends, family, neighbors, not just your friends and family and neighbors, not just you, the caregiver, but your loved one. So if it's your husband you're caring for, his friends, family, neighbors. If it's your mom, her friends, family, neighbors. So I see a tertiary caregiver as part of the crew, but not necessarily, I'm sorry, a therapist is part of the crew, but not necessarily as tertiary. But that's a great question. But Marty, you might view it differently than I do. That's just the way that I view the caregiving crew. So let's look at a couple of things that a tertiary might do. Something that's for the primary caregiver, the captain, or for the secondary caregiver, the dockhand. I'm sorry, the first mate. So again, just like the secondary, pick up groceries, pick up prescriptions, pick up the kids from softball practice. Do some online research. You know what? Mom really needs to update her advanced directives. She really needs to update her will. Let me look up, that tertiary person, they live far away, but they're good with internet research. They can look up where there's a good elder law attorney practice in my area. Somebody already said this, mow your lawn. At this time of year, everybody's thinking about lawn care. Again, pick up your kids from practice. So a lot of different options for a lot of different options for how a tertiary caregiver can contribute. So now that we've covered primary, secondary, and tertiary, the captain, the first mate, and the dockhand. Before we get into thanking our sponsors and getting into a little bit more detail about our sponsors, I would like to just make one more analogy, and I write about this in the book, Cruising Through Caregiving. So nautical analogies work for me because I'm a boater. But if a nautical analogy doesn't work for you, I'm going to give you the example of, say, a Hollywood movie. So in Cruising Through Caregiving, I write about a movie that I liked very much called Moneyball. Some of you may have seen it. I believe it was a 2011 movie. And so your primary caregiver, the lead actor, can you imagine that movie? Of course, Brad Pitt plays the lead, but can you imagine that movie just being Brad Pitt? In the secondary caregiver role, you would have Jonah Hill, who was such a strong support, he got nominated for an Academy Award. And then what I would say the tertiary caregivers are likened to is the cheering fans, because the movie was about baseball. And in that film, can you imagine a movie about baseball, just with Brad Pitt, just with Jonah Hill, but no cheering fans in the background and none of the players? Those would be more the tertiary folks. So if the boating analogy doesn't work for you, the boating examples don't work for you, maybe think of that. And it's just like anything. It's like if you go to a hotel and there's a manager of the hotel. I write about this in Cruising Through Caregiving too. You don't want to see the hotel manager doing everything. They have cleaning staff. They have staff at the front desk. They have, if there's a restaurant, they have restaurant staff. There's lots of different jobs for different people. And I think actually caregiving for somebody with dementia is probably a lot harder than running a hotel. Okay, so I want to get back to thanking our wonderful partners and sponsors, Solidarity for Charity, Oasis Senior Advisors. I encourage you, if you're not on their email lists for their updates, go there. Please get some information from them. They can be wealth of resources and information for you. But now I'm going to take a few moments to introduce some of the key partners that have worked on this project about getting the virtual book club for dementia caregivers launched. And so the first person that I would like to introduce to you is Tim Ivankovich. And Tim, is the CEO of Oasis Senior Advisors. And he launched Oasis Senior Advisors, which are franchises that help older adults and their families find senior living when they need it. But they also help with other services that older adults might need. And this service is through franchises in the local community, and it is completely free to the person who is asking for help. So if you're a caregiver and it's time that your loved one might need senior living or some other services, Tim and his team of franchisees, as long as they're in your geographic area, and there's many all over the country, Tim and the franchisees can help you with that process. So I'm going to take a few moments I want to ask Tim to go ahead and share his screen. I'm going to stop sharing mine. I'm going to ask Tim to share his camera rather, so we can see him. And we're going to do a little Q&A with Tim before we get back to with Tim and then RJ before we get back to the rest of our program. So Tim, if we could ask you to share.
Sure, Jen, you're breaking up just a little bit, but hi, it's great to be on the program today, and also want to start by saying thank you to Jen and her group, and this virtual book tour is just fantastic, giving a great deal of information and education to folks that are really needed. We're excited to be a part of it for sure, so thank you there.
Absolutely. So Tim, a couple questions for you about Oasis Senior Advisors. When would it be appropriate for someone to reach out to Oasis Senior Advisors for help?
Well, I think early on, it's really important that as you're starting to think about your parents, in most cases where we work with the children of the seniors, that it may not be safe for them to live at home. So earlier is better, where we can start the planning process, where we have plenty of time to really find that perfect location for the senior, whether it be assisted living or memory care or even independent living in some cases. So the earlier we start those conversations, typically the easier it is and the more calm the whole process is.
And we know that so many families and individuals, they want to stay at home for as long as possible, and that's great. But if you ever find yourself needing or thinking that maybe at some point we're not going to be able to stay home, this is a way for you to get some guidance, to get some assistance on looking and finding the right match. So just making a relationship with Oasis Senior Advisors, is it appropriate maybe even to reach out more than a year if you think your loved one might not need you for a year?
Yeah, like I said, earlier is better. And our preference too is to have that senior age in place as long as possible. Would love for them to stay in their home as long as it's safe and secure for them to do that. But when it's not, again, I think that's where we have a great asset for those families at a free service to help them find that right assisted living at their convenience.
And one of the great things about Oasis is that it is free to families and older adults. And can you tell us, why is it free? How is it free to everybody?
Sure, it's a great question. And yeah, our service is completely free to the family. We are paid basically by the community in which we place that senior, where we have an agreement in place with them that says when and if we bring you a senior and they place in your community, you'll pay us a referral fee, which the communities love because we're bringing them wonderfully qualified seniors and that are in dire need of assistance. And again, for the family, it's a great asset because, again, there's no cost to them for our help in finding that right place.
Great. So thank you, Tim, for being part of this. And I know that you're going to be on with us all 15 weeks. So if people have questions for Tim or for RJ, we're going to introduce RJ next. But please feel free to write those in as well. And don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to have you. Actually, it seems like we have someone writing in. Jan is saying, is this service nationally available? Tim, I'm going to let you cover that.
Sure. Thanks, Jan. That's a great question. Yeah, we're a franchise organization, and currently we have 80 locations in about 28 or 30 states. So most of the major metros, we've got some franchisees there that can help and work through most of us. So yeah, we are a nationally branded company and would love to work with you wherever you're located.
So just ask. I mean, better ask, ask the question, are you in my area? Are you, or if you're not sure, but you can check on the oasissenior-advisors.com website. So sure. Great question. Okay. So thank you so much, Tim. And now I'm going to ask Tim to close his camera, and we're going to ask RJ Mercedes to join us. Awesome.
Hello.
So RJ Mercedes is the Director of Programming and Development for Hilarity for Charity. And he has been doing nonprofit management for the past 8 years. He has a master's from Northeastern University. And so RJ, thank you. This is so wonderful what Hilarity for Charity does. Tell me, how did Hilarity for Charity start?
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for joining today. I'm looking forward to kind of learning as we go throughout the entire 15 weeks together. So thanks again to Jen and Tim. Lauren Miller Rogan and Seth Rogan founded Hilarity for Charity after Lauren's mom, Adele, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when she was only 55. So Lauren was only 25. So clearly Lauren experienced firsthand the difficulty of being a young person dealing with the disease and the difficulty of being a caregiver. So she wanted to build some kind of support line to help young people find their voice in this fight and also support the many caregivers that are out there. So Lauren, Seth, and 3 friends basically turned their grief into action and decided to use laughter as a medicine in the fight against Alzheimer's. They hosted a variety show in 2012 in Los Angeles. Each year we've been hosting shows. I invite you, if you haven't already, you can watch our most recent variety show which is streaming on Netflix. So just search for Hilarity for Charity and you should find it.
So tell us, what kind of services does Hilarity for Charity provide to dementia caregivers?
Sure. So while we know there isn't currently a cure for Alzheimer's, there definitely is care. As Hilarity for Charity started raising its visibility, we decided to really stick our feet in the ground. So we established a in-home respite care grant program to give family caregivers the relief that they need and deserve. So we partner with an exceptional home care provider, Home Instead Senior Care, where we have awarded over 250,000 hours of care. Again, it's care relief in just over 5 years to family caregivers in every US state and even in Canada. So we know that every situation is unique. Our care grants have allowed caregivers the peace of mind to leave their home knowing that their loved one will be cared for, so that they can go grocery shopping, they can meet with friends, keep their job, take care of their own medical needs, which we know typically go unchecked, or just simply to recharge. So lastly, I'll mention that as we continue to run this program, we've wanted to really expand our care to Alzheimer's families through other programming. We run online support groups. So if you can't make it in person, we run these digital support groups that meet weekly. We also are starting our virtual book clubs like today, and more to come. And then lastly, we're going to be launching some exciting work, which is really around preserving young minds and thinking about ways that we can be decreasing risk of ever developing the disease in the first place.
And what's so special about Hilarity for Charity, I think, in addition to all of what you just described, is the outreach that you're doing to young people, because a good number of caregivers, I think it's about 25%, is it 25%, of caregivers are millennials. And that's significant. And I think that the outreach that you're doing to try to help people prevent Alzheimer's and other dementias from happening is wonderful, and engaging the younger caregivers, because a lot, like you said, Lauren Muller-Rogan was 25 years old. It became a caregiver with her family members. And I mean, that it's happening to families all over the country of all ages. It's not just older adults that are caregiving, it's people of all ages. So, so if somebody feels moved to donate or participate in some of the fundraising activities with Hilarity for Charity, tell us how we could do that.
Sure. Well, so I just want to mention that if anyone is interested in our care grant program for yourself, I would encourage you to think about applying. There's 3 eligibility factors. So the one is that your loved one has a professional diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another dementia, that your loved one lives at home, either in the US or Canada, and that you as a caregiver face significant financial or emotional hardships directly as a result of your providing care to your loved one. So you can go on our website, hilarityforcharity.org, to learn more about the program and to access our online application. So basically, we're just looking for folks that want to get interested to learn more about our programs, to support us in different ways. Again, go to our website. I think you had the link up there, which is www.hilarityforcharity.org. If you are interested in supporting us, just so you know, $25 relieves a caregiver for 1 hour so that they can rest, they can get healthy, they can recharge, so they can be a better caregiver. So every dollar really helps us and goes a long way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And you mentioned Home Instead as a partner that administers the grant. We're actually very fortunate. We're going to have Lakeland Hogan from Home Instead Corporate in several weeks going to join us, and she is a wealth of information. So I'm really excited for the week that she's on as well. So thank you so much, RJ. Thank you so much, Tim. So now back to our content.
My pleasure.
So I have a couple questions for you to think about today. Why are you caregiving? Now, we're going to get into this a lot more deeply in future weeks, but sometimes people feel that they absolutely have to be caregiving. And I want you to think about that, because a lot of caregivers, or a lot of people who have loved ones who are ill with dementia, they opt out of caregiving. They don't do it. So I want you to think about it. What motivates you as a caregiver? And also, as a few folks have mentioned so far, are you in the right role? Maybe you're in that secondary role, but you really belong in that primary role. Maybe it's time to have a conversation, or maybe you're in a tertiary role, but you want to do more for the person that you care about. So I want you to be thinking, are you really in the right role? And in future programs, we are going to discuss how to make some of those changes, how to have some of those conversations, because they can be very difficult conversations. But when I ask, why are you caregiving? I want you to think, is it because of marriage vows? Is it because of religious reasons? Is it because of guilt? And sometimes it's a combination of both. But I want everybody on this program, if you are a caregiver, I want you to know that you are special, because there are countless people who have loved ones who have dementia, who are not involved whatsoever. So I want to thank you for what you're doing, because it really, you are making a choice. It may not feel like it, but you have made a choice to step up and be a caregiver. And that's why I'm so happy that we have groups like Oasis Senior Advisors, that we have groups like Hilarity for Charity, that we have a lot of other resources that we're going to share with you as we go on this voyage of Cruising Through Caregiving Book Club over the next 15 weeks. I want to tell you real briefly a story about my family, actually. So in Cruising Through Caregiving, we talk about the concept, I talk about the concept over and over again, that if you're caregiving and you get too stressed out, I call it going overboard. And I say going overboard because maybe you're trying to do everything by yourself. You're not letting anyone help. You're not letting anyone in. That's going overboard. Or maybe you quit your job prematurely and you're finding that being a full-time caregiver isn't the right fit for you. I call that going overboard. And we'll talk about these in depth. But the concept of going overboard means you've made a misstep and you need to do what I call course correct. Do something different, change it. It's never too late to course correct. But I'd like to share with you the example of my cousin Sarah. So my cousin Sarah is 26. She's a millennial. We're very close. I have permission to share her photograph here, but this is she and one of her friends. They're on a yoga retreat. So Sarah is both a dietitian, a registered dietitian, and a certified yoga instructor. And Sarah, a few years ago, she was out on the boat with Sean and I and some other family members. And she is at the time, I think she was about 23. And she is a certified yoga instructor, one of the most graceful people I've ever encountered, very all balanced all the time. And she slipped and fell overboard when she was on our boat, when she was trying to get off of the boat. And this is a lesson because Sean and I are very much into boat safety. And we say, if a 23-year-old yoga instructor in perfect shape can go overboard, you can too. Please hold on. Please be careful. And this is an analogy, an example that I like to say is that it doesn't matter how experienced you are as a caregiver, how well-intentioned you are, how much you love your loved one. We all are at risk for going overboard. We're all at risk for making a misstep. So maybe, for example, you're trying to reason with your loved one who has dementia and you're making that mistake. You're going overboard, but you have the opportunity to learn how to communicate in a way that your loved one understands better. So I want you to really consider, there are probably areas where you are going overboard now, or you've gone overboard, you're going to go overboard in the future, but I want to reassure you and let you know, you can always course correct. You're always going to be able to say, let's take a step back, and I'm going to do caregiving a little bit differently. It's never too late. So when we talk about that, I want you to think about my cousin Sarah, because of all people to fall off of the boat, we never thought it was going to be her. But I do want you to think about this. Today, do you need to course correct? Is there anywhere in your caregiving that you're saying, I'm tired, I'm burnt out? Think about, is there anything you need to course correct on? I want you to just be thinking about it before we get to next week. We're going to talk a lot about that during the 15 weeks. I want to remind everybody why we're doing this. These book club sessions are for you. They're to help you reduce your stress. Because if you're on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being no stress, which I don't think is possible, especially if you're a caregiver, and 100 being you can't take another stressful event happening. If you say, Are you kidding? I'm at 120. What our goal is to get you to 110. We want to get you to 80. We want to get you to 70. So wherever you are today, it is possible to reduce your stress level. It really, really is, but you have to work at it a little bit. We want you to reduce your burnout, because if you are burnout, I promise you're not going to be good to your loved one. And we want to increase your access to resources. We have guests coming from AARP, from the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, from Alzheimer's Speaks, from Home Instead, from Argentum. So, and of course, Oasis Senior Advisors, Hilarity for Charity. We have lots of resources we're going to share with you and give you as much information as possible so you can surround yourself with good information and help. And then finally, I want to help you expand. We want to help you expand on your ideas about what it means to be a good caregiver. There's no perfect caregiver, only good. And you're probably already a really good caregiver. And in a lot of cases, we want to help you pull back, because a lot of caregivers try to be perfect and it's just not possible. So think about all of this before the next session. And I want you to please consider writing jen@generationshealth.com. Send your questions before the next program and we'll answer them. We're not going to answer your email, but we're going to answer them during the next event. So if you think of anything between now and next week, please write it in, jen@generationshealth.com. So I want to say again, another big, big thank you to Hilarity for Charity, particularly RJ and Jojo and Bonnie, and also Oasis Senior Advisors, particularly Tim and John. I want to thank them so much. Please visit their websites. There's wonderful information there for everybody. And please be thinking about your questions for next week. For questions for next week's book club, please send to Jen, Jen, @generationshealth.com. And if you have questions, if you don't have access to a computer, feel free to call my office, 443-416-7710. And Darlene will write down your question and she will give it to us so we have it for next week. So again, if you don't have access to a computer, maybe you're listening to this on the telephone, you can call or even text your questions to 443-416-7710. Any questions for the book club. And again, we're not going to call you back. We're not going to write back. We're just going to bring them up for the next book club. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And we really hope to see you next Wednesday. We do have a few extra minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and see if anybody would like to chat in, ask any questions, make any last comments before we wrap up. Otherwise, thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. But we're going to hang in. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. Yes, we're going to leave this open for just a little bit longer, but I do want to mention that Jen is actually going to be on national radio, Sirius XM, channel 132, next Tuesday, May 21 at 5 p.m. Eastern. So if you're able to join her, please feel free to take a listen. And again, next Wednesday, May 22nd at 4 p.m. Eastern is going to be our next virtual book club. Please join us and do send in those questions. We'd love to hear from you. So again, leave this open for a little bit longer and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody.